Hey everybody, and welcome to the 5 Bytes podcast. I'm your host, Rory Monahan. Coming up on this week's episode, Microsoft may be about to announce some significant security changes for the Windows operating systems. Also, it was another bad week recently for CrowdStrike as another update went wrong. And 2 new zero-day vulnerabilities have been discovered and published for Google Chrome. For this and more, keep listening to this episode of the podcast, which as always is brought to you by my sponsors. And that includes Numecent, the inventors of the first and only cloud-native container management platform for Windows desktops. And of course also brought to you by Master Packager, who make an application packaging software that helps you build packages that end users love, enterprises want, and the Windows OS needs. If you enjoy the show each week, you have these awesome sponsors to thank. And now for some news. I have to firstly credit my buddy David Wilkinson with this next story because he let me know about it before it was even published by media outlets. But to start off the news this week, it appears CrowdStrike had another update gone awry. Several techies reported their organizations had performance issues, including delays and slowness when running things, and it had lasted all day. A status update from CrowdStrike said performance had been returning to normal around 12:20 UTC last Thursday. In the status update, CrowdStrike went on to state, quote, CrowdStrike identified and resolved a cloud performance issue this morning, again being last Thursday, that had caused system delays for a small segment of EU cloud customers. This is not related to the channel file 291 incident, and all customers have remained protected throughout. The spokesperson declined to say how many customers were affected by the issue, just stating that it was a nominal number of customers. Oof. I guess at least it didn't cause global blue screens of death, but even having this performance impact for European customers so soon after the major content update gone wrong is just terrible. It looks awful for the company. Confidence is already rocked with CrowdStrike, and it's just going to raise further questions about their QA processes. It was being reported last weekend and early this week that an announcement was expected to come this week from Microsoft about changes to handling kernel drivers in the OS, but it now appears there will be an event held at the Microsoft campus in Redmond on September 10th to possibly announce some of these potential changes with their partners. This should be very interesting because I do not see how they can make sudden drastic changes to what third-party vendors can do with kernel drivers. They already have a certification process in place, which is a program I can remember FSLogix being involved with before their acquisition. So they're already working with some of these third-party vendors around the kernel driver signing. I also anticipate some of the security vendors crying foul if Microsoft tries to restrict kernel-level access, whilst allowing its own endpoint security products to maintain that level of access for themselves. This would make for an uneven playing surface. The game would be rigged and the table tilted in Microsoft's favor. Perhaps there's going to be some sort of middle ground, like requiring any vendor products with kernel level access to have auto updates disabled by default. That way it may explicitly put it in the hands of the customers to control the updates one way or another, therefore maybe put some liability on customers so they can't blame a specific vendor or Microsoft if something like the CrowdStrike incident happens again. I'm not entirely sure. I guess we'll have to wait and see. It's still a couple weeks away for that announcement, I guess. Google has revealed that it patched the 9th and 10th zero-day vulnerabilities exploited in the wild against Google Chrome in 2024. CVE-2024-7965 is a high-severity vulnerability and is described as an inappropriate implementation in Google Chrome's V8 JavaScript engine that can let remote attackers exploit heap corruption via a crafted HTML page. So another vulnerability in that V8 engine. And there was also CVE-2024-7971, which was caused by a V8 type confusion weakness. Google has fixed both 0 days in Chrome version 128.0.6613.84 or 0.85 for Windows and macOS versions, and in version 128.0.6613.84 for Linux users. And they've been rolling out to all stable channel users since last Wednesday, according to bleepycomputer.com. According to Ars Technica, Microsoft have mentioned in a support document that they were formally deprecating Windows' 39-year-old control panel applet. But following widespread reporting of this change, Microsoft has either backtracked or clarified its language to remove the note about control panel being deprecated in favor of the Settings app. The current version of the page has changed to now say that many of the settings in Control Panel are in the process of being migrated to the Settings app, which offers a more modern and streamlined experience. It's not clear whether this reflects a policy change or just a clarification of the language. And Ars Technica reportedly asked Microsoft whether it has changed plans to deprecate the Control Panel or if the original version of the support page was just incorrect in the first place, but they've yet to receive a response. And to be honest with you, the line that they've updated to of just moving many of the settings from Control Panel into the Settings app is not new. I think they reported that or announced that maybe 3 or 4 years ago. I covered it on the podcast before. So perhaps the page or the new page was incorrect, and maybe they jumped the gun and shouldn't have said, hey, we're deprecating it sometime in the future and sometime soon. I'm sure eventually they want to retire it, and they do want to get everything over to the Settings app. But maybe it was too early to announce that because they're not close to having everything moved. According to WindowsCentral.com, Microsoft looks to be toying with the position of the user icon in the Start menu and changing the menu that appears when you click on it. Currently, the user icon in the Start menu is positioned above the Power and Settings icon in the hamburger menu, and clicking it opens a menu that lets you sign out and change account settings. The latest Windows 10 preview build changes the position to be at the very top of the hamburger menu, and clicking it will now show a menu that gives you a brief overview of your Microsoft account and subscription status. Here, it will let you know if you are not subscribed to Microsoft 365. Microsoft is also working on updates to the Windows 10 Settings app, swapping out monochrome icons for colorful ones in the top banner area when you first open the app. Not everyone is too happy about the first change, and there's been suggestions that it's an attempt at kind of sneaky advertising or upselling of Microsoft 365 services directly from within the Start menu. So yeah, I could see that, I guess. MacRumors.com has reported that there are plans for new Macs to begin shipping with 16 gigs of memory, which is not really that much of a surprise, I guess. It seems to be becoming the kind of baseline standard now. Recently, I took part in a webinar with Mark West from Kingston University talking about Windows 11 migration planning, and he said that at the university they were planning to baseline on 16 gigs of memory. And yeah, that's just kind of the way things are going because applications are becoming more resource intensive. Of course, on Macs, Apple has greater control over the quality of the applications and can maybe scrutinize resource utilization a bit more, but regardless, it looks like that's going to be a new standard going forward for Macs too. Apple is also set to hold an event in 2 weeks' time, I believe on September 9th, where they're expected to announce or launch new products including the latest iPhone and Apple Watch. There was another case of concerning results from Gen AI with a German journalist reporting that when he typed his name and location into Microsoft Copilot, Copilot falsely claimed he had been charged with and convicted of child abuse and exploiting dependents. It also claimed that he had been involved in a dramatic escape from a psychiatric hospital and had exploited grieving women as an unethical mortician. Copilot even went so far as to claim that it was unfortunate that someone with such a criminal past had a family, and according to osnews.com, it provided his full address with phone number and route planner. The explanation of this happening is because, as a journalist, he's covered stories about many crimes, so essentially conflated crimes in stories that he reported on, suggesting he had committed them. What makes matters even worse, if you could believe it, is that he has absolutely no recourse. He contacted the public prosecutor's office in his locality, but they stated they can't press charges because the accusations coming from Copilot are not being made by a real person. According to the report, Microsoft have just thrown their hands in the air and absolved themselves of any and all responsibility by pointing to its terms of service in which Microsoft discards liability for content generated by Copilot. So this is an extreme example of where AI-generated content and results can be wrong, but not only wrong, but extremely damaging to people. In a side note, I saw that Graham Clowley on LinkedIn shared that I believe he was using Google's AI and asking it how many children the former UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson has, and it just repeatedly refused to answer the question because it would not answer like a political question. And then he kept kind of rebuffing, saying, well, this is not a political question. It's about his children. Like, how many children does he have? And then it would say, well, I can't answer this because it's political. And then it's like, well, Boris Johnson is no longer the prime minister and he's not a sitting MP, so it's not political. But it kept just saying it can't answer. Whereas if you asked ChatGPT, it would say he's at least 8 children and goes through with detail of who those children are and when they were born. Although it did have some information incorrect too, so a less extreme example maybe of AI getting something wrong, but also an example of AI protecting a certain class of people and politicians, whereas it's very happy to just completely throw this journalist under the bus, which is pretty interesting. It seems the need to regulate AI was yesterday, and the second best time to do it is now. According to bleepycomputer.com, an improper access control vulnerability has been identified in the SonicWall SonicOS management access, potentially leading to unauthorized resource access and, in specific conditions, causing the firewall to crash. This issue affects SonicWall Firewall Gen 5 and Gen 6 devices, as well as Gen 7 devices running SonicOS version 7.0.1-5035 and older versions. Specific models impacted are Gen 5 Soho devices running version 5.9.2.14-12.0 and older, Gen 6 various TZ, NSA, and SM models running version 6.5.4.14-109N and older, and Gen 7 TZ and NSA models running SonicOS build version 7.0.1-5035 and older as mentioned. Security updates have been made available for download through mysonicwall.com, but those who cannot apply the fixes immediately are recommended to restrict firewall management access to trusted sources or disable WAN management access from the internet. Microsoft has provided a workaround to temporarily fix a known issue that is blocking Linux from booting on dual boot systems with Secure Boot enabled, as I covered in the last episode of the podcast. Microsoft believed the update would not be delivered to devices where the dual boot was being detected. However, after acknowledging the issue this week, it also confirmed that the dual boot detection did not detect some customized methods of dual booting and applied the SBAT value when it should not have been applied. For those who have already installed the August 2024 Windows updates and can no longer boot Linux on their dual boot devices, Microsoft recommends deleting the SBAT update and ensuring the future SBAT updates will no longer be installed. I'll share a link to an article by bleepycomputer.com that covers the steps that you'll need to follow if this does affect you, and that will be with episode 349 over at 5bytespodcast.com. Also, according to bleepycomputer.com, Microsoft has confirmed and fixed a known issue causing performance issues, boot problems, and freezing on Windows Server 2019 systems after installing the August 2024 security updates. Again, this is something that I covered on a previous episode of the podcast. Microsoft has resolved this pretty widespread known issue using a known issue rollback and is working to include the fix in a future Windows update. So, of course, with a known issue rollback, that's outside the regular process of the Windows Update service, so it's going to require some manual input and effort from your administrators. My employer and show sponsor, Numecent, has released version 1.3.1 of Cloudpager that brings features such as a new dashboard providing insights into application usage in your organization. including things like top 10 applications by users, top 10 applications by size, a chart plotting deployments and launches of applications, indicating applications by state, and more. There is also a new log collection feature, which can be used to gather logs from a user's desktop without a need to bug the person and set up a remote session. There's also an audit log feature that shows administrative actions taken in Cloudpager and can be used for generating reports. There's even more, but I will leave it there for this story, and I just suggest that you check out the blog posts over on numecent.com for more information. NASA has announced the stranded astronauts are now expected to stay put until February of next year, when a SpaceX mission will hopefully return them to Earth. While they state they are continuing to investigate the root cause, there is no confirmed details shared yet. You may recall there was speculation that they may have had to attempt a software update to return a feature that was in an earlier version of the Boeing Starliner craft, but it appears they are at least not willing to risk the lives of the astronauts with this update. There were reports and suggestions that they may try to return the Starliner spacecraft without the astronauts in it, so perhaps they'll push the update, then try to get the thrusters to work and bring the spacecraft back, but then separately launch a SpaceX mission to retrieve the astronauts. All speculation because they did not share the details. The legendary Linus Torvalds was recently interviewed and shared that he's disappointed that the adoption of Rust is not going faster, saying, quote, "I was expecting updates to be faster, but part of the problem is that old-time kernel developers are used to C and don't know Rust. They're not exactly excited about having to learn a new language that is, in some respects, very different. So there's been some pushback on Rust," end quote. On top of that, he commented saying that, quote, "Another reason has been the Rust infrastructure itself has not been super stable," end quote. He also said that he doesn't care about newer technologies like the cloud and Kubernetes, saying the only things that matter is the kernel. Yeah. Okay. He also went on to suggest that security vulnerabilities are really just bugs, and that bugs happen. Which, yeah, I get that. But that's in the face of an increasing amount of security vulnerabilities and exploits in the wild. So while acknowledging that, yes, these are going to happen, I guess it doesn't make things any better. Anyway, now this episode's scripts, tricks, and tips. First tip for this week, Erik from ZenApp blog shared that Cisco Secure Client MSI does not have a property for a predefined gateway, and suggests that you could simply use Master Packager to create an MST file and drag and drop your custom profile.xml in. And he has a tweet that shows just that. Finally, I saw that the awesome guy Leech recently took part in an IT automation podcast episode. Well, I just call everything a podcast nowadays because even video stuff is podcast. But in the discussion at PSConfEU, Guy, of course, talks PowerShell. He also discusses AI and shares some dad jokes, which is not a surprise. And I'll share a link to that if you want to check out the episode for yourself. That's going to be over at 5bytespodcast.com for episode 349. And as always, thank you so much for listening this week.